Hi, this is Steve Carlson, candidate for president in 2016, independent from Minnesota. I'd like your support to keep the independent voter voice alive in Minnesota and throughout the country. Recently, Kim Davis, a Democrat from Rowan County in Kentucky, was jailed by a federal judge in an obvious attempt to intimidate not only Christians and people of faith to fall in line with Anthony Kennedy's Supreme Court ruling against marriage, but to bully the states through their state clerks. I want to take this occasion to propose a radically centrist solution to this apparent conundrum. Given the court's recent direction, it is clear that they have chosen to allow what they loosely call marriage, but which they recognize is not in fact marriage, for a new class of beneficiaries, men in a relationship with men and women in a relationship with women. First time in 2,000 years, they admit, but unless they reconsider, all the husbands and wives in America will have to live with this decision. Excuse me if I don't celebrate it. The question here is Kim Davis being imprisoned indefinitely because of some violation of the so-called law of the land? What's going on here? John Kasich, Jeb Bush, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, Carly Fiorina, Lindsey Graham, and others, even Donald Trump, but not Franklin Graham, they all say all 50 states, even down to the clerk of a county or their deputies, have to comply with the law of the land, which they imply, if this has not been shown, is what David Bunning, named federal judge by Jeb's brother George W., is doing, complying with the law of the land. But is that really true? And what can we do to deal with this situation, which evidently infringes on the rights of states to regulate real marriage? For instance, do we really need to stop calling husbands husbands and wives wives just because homosexuals and lesbians want us to stop? Obviously not. It's up to a state to design its own laws. In Minnesota, outrageously, Mark Dayton and people like Scott Dibble have forced Minnesotans to deny their gender in a marriage. That's a slap in the face, which deserves a slap back, frankly. And as a result of Kennedy's ruling, praised inappropriately by Barack Obama, scores of state laws in 37 states whose laws protect only marriage between a man and a wife need to be rewritten ASAP so that this new kind of marriage dreamed up by Kennedy can be accommodated. Kim Davis's case shows the difficulty of respecting the religious liberties and states' rights of the 50 states, as the federal courts are not only preempting, but once again occupying the southern states and many normal American states with respect to our families. And so I am proposing that to carry out the commands coming down from the U.S. Supreme Court, states should be allowed to preserve traditional marriage and all the laws they have in place, but at the same time, as required, create additional laws to issue the documentation required by the Supreme Court's new invention in a quiet and dignified way, which will not derogate or detract from the very important regulation of that sacred bond between a man and a woman, or even those who are merely married before a civil judge. Husbands can be husbands, wives can be wives and mothers. This surely is something the Supreme Court can never take from us. Kim Davis should not be jailed for contempt, and the problem is more than just tyranny from a few Supreme Court justices. It's Kentucky state law. The media has, as usual, caused a stampede against Kim Davis solely because she has stated that she follows God's law. She also has to follow Kentucky law because they have laws for solemnizing marriage. And it is an injury to the people of the United States by the federal judges in 57 states who seek to destroy those laws. In Kentucky's case, here is what the applicable statutes hold. Kentucky Revised Statutes 402.080 provides, quote, "No marriage shall be solemnized without a license. Therefore, the license shall be issued by the clerk of the county in which the female resides at the time, unless the female is 18 years of age or over or a widow, and the license is issued on her application in person or by writing signed by her, in which case it can be issued by any county clerk." In her worthless class action suit, April Miller, whose case is being used by Bunning to beat down Kim Davis, simply asserted no marriage shall be solemnized without a license therefore. She left off the rest. But what does this statement that Kentucky solemnizes its marriages with a license have to do with Kim Davis? The clause does not mention anything about clerks, just that Kentucky solemnizes marriage with licenses. This is what started all the problems, just that Kentucky solemnizes marriage with licenses. One view is that the state should never have issued licenses to anybody. It worked for a long time without this. But states wanted to regulate households who were reproducing children. Now they're helping to stop the human fetuses from being produced. But the last point I want to make is that Kentucky is set up for marriages between a man and a female, and that under current law, April Miller and the other female are able to get their license, if Kentucky allows that, from a deputy, and Kim Davis is not required to sign that at all. And so she should not be held in contempt by a federal court or in jail right now because she refused to sign it. States never solemnized marriages before, and it is arrogant to think solemn marriages come from the states in the first place, because it is a religious liberty to marry. The state can do whatever they want apart from these religious rights exercised by Christians and others, but they may not abridge the rights of Christians, period. And we call ourselves husbands and wives, and we call ourselves wives and mothers and husbands and fathers. We do not ask permission from Mark Dayton or Barack Obama or Anthony Kennedy. And to require that obviously violates the First Amendment and must be struck down, resisted, and in the end contemptuously ignored. Now, if Kennedy requires that we give papers to homosexuals and lesbians, the state legislature should take that order and respond as the people's representatives. In the meantime, David Bunning and a majority of the Supreme Court is beating up on a single small woman who has the duty to keep records of men and women getting married in Rowan County. And you have the ACLU in there making money again and interfering now in the rights of marriage, now the Un-American Civil Liberties Union. In seeking contempt against Mrs. Davis, the ACLU argues that Rowan County must issue marriage licenses because, quote, Kentucky law specifically imposes upon county clerks the obligations to do so, unquote. They then charge at Davis because she opposes homosexuality and lesbianism and doesn't think they're marriage because she has personal religious beliefs. In reality, this punishment against her is because of her religious beliefs. I'll accept that David Bunning also says he has religious beliefs, but he's got this big job for life, honored as a federal judge, and so he essentially wants to take over Davis's job, lock her up, and use her deputies to run her office. This is an obvious outrage, because the Kentucky legislature has to do this, not the federal government, and not David Bunning. The facts of this case, Miller versus Davis, are not Davis's religious beliefs, not whether, in her mind, Davis has a policy, not even whether the deputies are going to give out these licenses to homosexuals and lesbians. There is one plain issue in this case. Have April Miller and her woman friend been denied the benefit of Kentucky law or not? Or have the others in this class action? I believe states, if necessary, can alter their laws to stop passing out licenses to solemnize any coupling, even real marriages that often produce children, if necessary. The Supreme Court, if they won't stand down, it may be necessary. But as Kentucky stands now, assuming the Supreme Court has defined marriage to include these new groups, Kentucky's law for doing so, and which must be followed, is very specific. The license shall be issued by the clerk of the county in which the female resides at the time, unless the female is 18 years of age or over, or a widow, and the license is issued on the application in person or by writing signed by her, in which case it may be issued by any county clerk. Well, it's not clear to me that any county clerk would not include a deputy county clerk and not requiring Davis's signature because she's the clerk and a deputy can sign that, it appears to me. But what is clear is that in the discussions in Bunning's court or submissions to that court, Davis agreed that her deputies could do this at the command of the federal government. And so I think the Bunning Court agrees that any county clerk does include deputies. But what is perfectly obvious is that Kentucky's current law is structured around having a female in every marriage, and they do not contemplate these strange new fabrications of the federal courts. So if there is an arrangement without a female, it is a violation of Kentucky law and of the laws of 37 states. And for her to ignore that law and just pass out papers just because Kennedy recognized some new right for the homosexuals and lesbians, that's a violation of Kentucky law. She can choose to be contemptuous of Kentucky current law, as Bunning forces her to do, or she can choose to follow the applicable law and be jailed and assaulted in the press by the federal government. All right-minded people appreciate her courage, but as far as following the law of the land, that includes Kentucky laws. This case shows more than anything else that the Supreme Court is incapable of administering marriage in Rowan County or even in Kentucky. The easiest thing to do is not to rewrite these laws because they are designed with a very specific, very legal and constitutional purpose in mind. Not to be a bigot, but to protect children, protect the relationships of men and women as husbands and wives and fathers and mothers. The federal government and the federal courts may not recognize these as sacred, and state legislatures like Mark Dayton's and Scott Dibble may efface these words from the language. Shamefully. But those rights are inherent, they are fundamental, and they are constitutional. I say preserve them, cherish them, and if homosexuals and lesbians are deserving of basic rights to enter into any civil relationship, that should be separate, because they are intruding on civilization, which we must preserve. We may amicably carry out the mandates of the Supreme Court without trampling the foundations of civilization. I'm Steve Carlson. I'm running for President of the United States, and I approve this message.